Aboard the opulent SS Aurora, a priceless pearl necklace vanishes during a glittering gala, plunging the ship into a whirl of suspicion. Was it the brash industrialist with gambling debts? The nervous steward with a master key? The charming jeweller hiding financial ruin? Or the stern captain with a secret grudge? As whispers of deceit ripple through the decks, only Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and piercing gaze, can unravel the web of lies. In a world of elegance and intrigue, where every smile hides a motive, the truth is as elusive as the pearls themselves, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 1. The Glitter of the Sea. The SS Aurora cut through the Mediterranean's sapphire waves, its white hull gleaming under a late summer moon. The ship, a floating palace of polished wood and brass, hummed with the anticipation of the evening's gala. Passengers in evening dress moved like bright fish through the grand saloon, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. At a small table near the starboard windows, Miss Jane Marple sat quietly, her knitting needles clicking with the steady rhythm of a metronome. Her eyes, bright and unassuming behind her spectacles, missed nothing. The gala's centrepiece was Lady Beatrice Harrow, a widow of 50 whose elegance belied her years. She stood near the grand staircase, her auburn hair swept up, her silk gown shimmering under the chandeliers. Around her neck hung the pearl necklace, a cascade of luminous orbs, each catching the light with a soft, opalescent glow. Whispers followed her like a breeze. The pearls, a gift from her late husband, were said to rival those in royal collections. Miss Marple, who had a knack for noticing what others overlooked, observed how Lady Beatrice touched the necklace frequently, as if to assure herself of its presence. The saloon was a study in contrasts. Captain Reginald Stokes, resplendent in his gold-braided uniform, moved among the guests with a commanding air, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. His smile was courteous, but Miss Marple noted a certain rigidity in his posture, as though he carried the weight of the ship's reputation on his broad shoulders. Near him stood Mr. Harold Vance, a broad-shouldered industrialist whose booming laugh masked a restlessness in his eyes. His interest in Lady Beatrice's necklace had been evident earlier when he'd lingered near her during cocktails, his gaze lingering on the pearls with a speculative glint. The steward, Thomas Reed, glided through the crowd, his wiry frame and deferential manner making him nearly invisible. Yet Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the way his hands trembled slightly as he refilled glasses, his glance darting toward the captain more often than necessary. And then there was Mr. Leonard Grayson, the jeweller, whose polished charm and encyclopedic knowledge of gems had made him a favourite among the ladies. He stood by the piano, his slim fingers gesturing animatedly as he spoke of pearl diving in the South Seas, his eyes never straying far from Lady Beatrice's necklace. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, the mood grew gayer, the lights brighter. Miss Marple, content to observe, recalled a similar evening in St. Mary Mead, when a vicar's wife had lost a brooch at a garden party. The culprit, as it turned out, had been a magpie, but human nature, Miss Marple knew, was far less predictable. She sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing the faces around her, their smiles and gestures, the subtle currents of envy or ambition that swirled beneath the surface. It was nearing midnight when a piercing cry cut through the music. Lady Beatrice stood at the centre of the saloon, her face pale, her hands clutching at her bare throat, My necklace!" she gasped. "It's gone!" The room fell silent, the dancers frozen mid-step. Captain Stokes was at her side in an instant, his voice calm but firm. "Please, madam, when did you last see it?" Lady Beatrice, trembling, explained that she had returned to her cabin briefly during the dancing, leaving the necklace on her dressing table. She had locked the door, she insisted, and was gone only moments. Now the pearls were nowhere to be found. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A theft on the SS Aurora? Impossible, some said, yet the whispers grew. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild expression unchanged. She noted the captain's quick order to secure the ship, Mr. Vance's flushed cheeks as he protested his innocence to no one in particular, Reed's sudden stillness, and Grayson's curious detachment, as if the news were merely an interesting puzzle. A theft at sea, Miss Marple mused, was a small stage for a drama, but no less revealing of human nature. She folded her knitting and rose, her curiosity alight. The game, as her old friend Sir Henry Clithering might say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Captain's Command. The SS Aurora's Grand Saloon, so recently alight with music and laughter, now buzzed with a different energy, a taut, uneasy hum of suspicion. The chandeliers still cast their golden glow, but the mood had shifted, as if a shadow had fallen across the polished floors. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face pale and her auburn hair slightly askew, stood near the grand staircase, clutching a lace handkerchief. Her cry of loss had silenced the orchestra, and the passengers, their evening finery now seeming out of place, gathered in knots, whispering theories about the vanished pearl necklace. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her corner table, her knitting folded neatly in her lap, observed the scene with her usual quiet clarity. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, moved from face to face, noting the flickers of unease, the sidelong glances, the subtle shifts in posture that betrayed more than words ever could. Captain Reginald Stokes took command with the authority of a man accustomed to quelling storms, both literal and figurative. He stood at the centre of the saloon, his gold-braided uniform gleaming, his broad shoulders squared. His voice, deep and resonant, carried over the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, raising a hand for silence, "a serious matter has arisen. Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace, a valuable item, has been reported stolen from her cabin. Rest assured, the crew of the SS Aurora will leave no stone unturned to recover it. I ask for your cooperation as we conduct a thorough investigation." Miss Marple's needles, though still, seemed to echo in her mind as she watched the captain. His words were measured, his tone reassuring, yet there was something in his manner, a certain briskness perhaps, that struck her as curious. In her experience, those who moved too quickly to assert control often had something to prove, or something to hide. She recalled a village squire in St. Mary Mead, always eager to organize the parish fete, yet found later to have pocketed half the donations. Not that Captain Stokes was such a man, she thought, but human nature was a constant, whether on land or sea. The captain continued, outlining his plan. "We will begin with a search of all cabins, starting with those nearest Lady Beatrice's. The purser and my officers will assist, and I assure you, this will be done with the utmost discretion. In the meantime, I ask that no one leave the saloon until we have established the facts." A murmur of protest rippled through the crowd, but Stokes's stern gaze quelled it. He turned to Lady Beatrice, his expression softening. "Madam, if you would accompany me to your cabin, we can confirm the details of the theft." Lady Beatrice nodded, her lips trembling. "It was on my dressing table," she said, her voice faint but clear. "I locked the door when I left for the dancing. I was gone only a quarter of an hour, perhaps less. When I returned, it was gone." Her hand fluttered to her throat, as if the pearls still hung there, a gesture Miss Marple found both poignant and telling. Grief for a lost treasure, she knew, could mask other emotions, anger, fear, or even guilt. As the captain led Lady Beatrice toward the cabins, the passengers shifted uneasily. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Mr. Harold Vance, the industrialist, who stood near the bar, his ruddy face flushed with more than champagne. He was speaking in low tones to Miss Clara Dunn, a young woman with delicate features and nervous hands. Vance's broad frame seemed to loom over her, and Miss Marple noted how Clara's eyes darted toward the captain, then away, as if afraid of being overheard. Vance had been near Lady Beatrice's cabin earlier that evening, a fact not lost on the other passengers, who cast suspicious glances his way. Miss Marple wondered if his interest in the necklace had been purely aesthetic, or if his well-known gambling habits hinted at a deeper motive. Nearby, Thomas Reed, the steward, moved silently among the tables, clearing empty glasses with mechanical precision. His wiry frame and downcast eyes made him seem part of the ship's furnishings, yet Miss Marple caught a fleeting look of strain on his face when the captain mentioned the cabin search. Reed's duties gave him access to every corner of the ship, a fact that had not escaped her notice. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a housemaid who moved just as quietly, and who had later been found with a stolen silver spoon hidden in her apron. Not that Reed was necessarily guilty, but Miss Marple knew that those who served often saw more than they admitted. Mr. Leonard Grayson, the jeweller, stood apart, leaning against a pillar with an air of detached amusement. His slim fingers toyed with a cigarette case, and his sharp eyes followed the captain's movements. Miss Marple had spoken with him briefly before the gala, and his knowledge of gems had impressed her, though his charm had seemed a touch too practiced. He had appraised Lady Beatrice's necklace that afternoon, a detail he had mentioned casually over cocktails. Now, as he watched the commotion, his expression was one of mild curiosity, as if the theft were a puzzle to be solved rather than a crime. Miss Marple's mind turned to a jeweller in her village, a man whose expertise had masked a penchant for swapping genuine stones with fakes. She made a mental note to observe Grayson more closely. The saloon doors swung open, and the purser, Mr. Edward Langley, entered, his face grim. He conferred briefly with the captain, who nodded and addressed the crowd again. "The purser has examined Lady Beatrice's cabin," Stokes announced. "The lock shows no signs of tampering, and the only keys are in Lady Beatrice's possession, and the steward's master set. This suggests the thief had access or was exceptionally skilled. We will proceed with the search immediately." The word immediately caught Miss Marple's attention. It was a curious choice, implying urgency that bordered on haste. Why, she wondered, was the captain so eager to begin? A thorough investigation might start with questioning those closest to the scene, yet Stokes seemed determined to act first and ask later. She recalled a village constable, always quick to raid a suspected poacher's cottage, only to find the real culprit elsewhere. Action, she knew, could be a distraction as much as a solution. As the captain organized his officers, Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. She approached Miss Clara Dunn, who stood alone now, twisting a bracelet on her wrist. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, her voice as soothing as a cup of tea, "you must be quite shaken by all this. Were you dancing when the theft occurred?" Clara's eyes widened, and she nodded quickly. "Oh, yes, Miss Marple. I was with Mr. Vance at the card tables. Then we danced. We didn't see anything, I swear." Her words tumbled out, and Miss Marple smiled, noting the girl's eagerness to confirm Vance's whereabouts. Loyalty, she thought, or perhaps something more binding. Returning to her seat, Miss Marple watched as the passengers were escorted to their cabins in small groups for the search. The captain's efficiency was admirable, but she couldn't shake the sense that he was directing the stage rather than seeking the truth. His officers moved with military precision, yet their faces betrayed a hint of unease, as if they too sensed the captain's urgency. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the necklace itself, those luminous pearls, so coveted, so easy to conceal. A thief would need opportunity, yes, but also audacity to steal during a gala when the ship was alive with eyes. She glanced at Reed, who had paused near the saloon doors, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. His eyes met hers for a moment, then darted away. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked had she been knitting, but her mind was already at work, threading together the fragments of the evening. Vance's interest in the pearls, Reed's access, Grayson's expertise, and the captain's haste. All were threads in a pattern not yet clear. She thought of a tapestry she had once seen in a country house, its beauty hiding a flaw in the weave that only close inspection revealed. This theft, she sensed, was such a tapestry, and she would need to look closely indeed. As the saloon emptied, Miss Marple remained, her presence unremarkable yet deliberate. A junior officer approached, offering to escort her to her cabin. "Thank you, young man," she said, her smile disarming, "but I shall stay a moment longer. The air here is quite refreshing." The officer hesitated, then nodded, leaving her to her thoughts. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, now quiet save for the faint creak of the ship. The theft of Lady Beatrice's necklace was no simple matter, she knew. It was a knot of human desires, greed perhaps, or envy, or something deeper still. And as the SS Aurora sailed on through the night, Miss Marple resolved to untangle it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The Guest's Alibi. The SS Aurora's Grand Saloon, now half empty, retained a ghostly echo of the gala's earlier gaiety. The chandeliers still gleamed, but their light fell on scattered chairs and abandoned glasses. As passengers, escorted by officers, dispersed to their cabins for the captain's search, Miss Jane Marple remained at her corner table, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her hands resting lightly on her folded knitting. Her eyes, keen and unobtrusive, followed the last stragglers, noting their hurried whispers and nervous glances. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had stirred the ship like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were revealing. Mr. Harold Vance, the industrialist, lingered near the saloon's bar, his broad frame filling out a tailored dinner jacket that seemed a touch too tight across the shoulders. His face, ruddy from champagne and agitation, bore a scowl as he muttered to Miss Clara Dunn, the young woman who had been his companion for much of the evening. Clara, delicate as a porcelain figurine, twisted her bracelet with quick, anxious fingers, her eyes darting toward the saloon doors where Captain Stokes had just exited with Lady Beatrice. Miss Marple, whose mild demeanour often invited confidences, had already marked Clara's unease during their brief exchange. Now she watched Vance closely, for his name had surfaced repeatedly in the passengers' murmurs, tied to his presence near Lady Beatrice's cabin before the theft. Vance's reputation preceded him, even to Miss Marple's quiet corner of St. Mary Mead. A man of industry, he had built a fortune in steel, but whispers of gambling debts followed him like a shadow. Earlier that evening, during cocktails, Miss Marple had overheard him admiring Lady Beatrice's necklace with a fervour that went beyond politeness. "A king's ransom, those pearls," he had said, his voice loud enough to carry, his eyes gleaming with something more than appreciation. Now, as he stood in the saloon, his bluster seemed tempered by a defensive edge, as if he sensed the weight of suspicion settling on him. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and approached the bar, where a steward was tidying up. "Such a distressing business, this theft," she remarked, her tone gentle, as if speaking of a mislaid shawl rather than a stolen fortune. The steward, a young man with a nervous smile, nodded. "Terrible, ma'am. Never had such a thing on the Aurora before." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. I suppose Mr. Vance was quite shocked. He seemed so taken with Lady Beatrice's necklace earlier. The steward hesitated, then leaned closer. "He was near her cabin before the dancing, ma'am. I saw him myself, though he said he was just passing by." This small confirmation piqued Miss Marple's interest. She thanked the steward and drifted toward Clara Dunn, who had stepped away from Vance to adjust her shawl at a nearby mirror. "My dear," Miss Marple said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby, "you must find all this excitement quite overwhelming. Were you with Mr. Vance all evening?" Clara's reflection in the mirror showed a flicker of alarm, but she turned with a practised smile. "Oh yes, Miss Marple. We were at the card tables until the dancing began, and then we stayed together. Harold, Mr. Vance, wouldn't have had time to do anything." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly concern. "Of course, my dear. It's just that people do talk, and Mr. Vance was seen near the cabins. But you're certain he was with you?" Clara's fingers tightened on her bracelet, and her voice grew higher. "Quite certain. We were never apart." The words came too quickly, and Miss Marple, who had seen many a young woman protect a man for reasons of loyalty or fear, noted the strain in Clara's eyes. She recalled a girl in St. Mary Mead, fiercely devoted to a wayward fiancé, whose alibis had crumbled under gentle scrutiny. Clara, she thought, might be such a girl. Vance, catching sight of their conversation, strode over, his heavy steps echoing on the polished floor. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" he said, his tone hearty but edged with wariness. "No need to trouble Miss Dunn with questions. We were together all evening, as she said. I've no interest in pearls, except to admire them on a lady's neck." His laugh was loud, but it did not reach his eyes. Miss Marple smiled, her demeanour as unthreatening as a village spinster. "Oh, I'm sure, Mr. Vance. It's just that one hears such stories, and I do like to get things clear. You were at the card tables, then dancing?" "Exactly. Vance said, his jaw tightening. "Ask anyone. Half the ship saw us." He placed a possessive hand on Clara's arm, guiding her toward the saloon doors. Miss Marple watched them go, noting how Clara's shoulders stiffened under his touch. A man like Vance, she thought, was used to bullying his way through life, whether in boardrooms or cardrooms. But bullying could hide desperation, and desperation could lead to theft. As the saloon grew quieter, Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind sifting through the evening's fragments. Vance's alibi, supported so earnestly by Clara, was too neat, too rehearsed. She thought of a village grocer who had sworn he was at church when a till was robbed, only to be undone by a child's innocent remark about seeing him elsewhere. Alibis, Miss Marple knew, were only as strong as the truth behind them. Clara's nervousness suggested a crack in the story, and Miss Marple resolved to probe it gently. A commotion at the saloon doors drew her attention. The purser, Mr. Langley, returned, his face flushed with exertion. He conferred with a junior officer, who then approached the remaining passengers. "The captain requests that everyone return to their cabins," the officer announced. "The search is underway, and will need to account for all passengers." Miss Marple rose, her small handbag clutched in one hand, and joined the group heading toward the cabins. As she walked, she passed Thomas Reed, the steward, who was carrying a tray of glasses to the galley. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw a flash of something, fear, perhaps, or calculation, before he looked away. In the corridor, Miss Marple overheard a snippet of conversation between two passengers. A retired colonel and his wife. "Vance is the sort who'd do it," the colonel muttered. "Always at the tables, losing more than he can afford." His wife shushed him, but Miss Marple filed the comment away. Gambling debts, she knew, could drive a man to desperate acts, and Vance's brash confidence might conceal a crumbling fortune. Yet she wondered if the suspicion falling on him was too convenient, too easily accepted by the ship's gossip mill. Reaching her own cabin, a modest but comfortable space with a porthole view of the dark sea, Miss Marple sat at the small desk and opened her notebook. She jotted down a few words. Vance, cabin, gambling, Clara's alibi. She paused, then added steward, access, nervous, and captain, haste. The jeweller, Mr. Grayson, would need his own entry, but for now, Vance occupied her thoughts. His presence near the cabin, his financial troubles, and Clara's protective demeanour formed a pattern, but not a complete one. Miss Marple knew that human nature, like her knitting, required patience to unravel. A dropped stitch could ruin the whole, and she suspected that Vance's alibi, like a faulty stitch, would not hold under close inspection. As the ship's engines thrummed beneath her, Miss Marple closed her notebook and gazed out the porthole. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly, its surface calm, but hiding depths where secrets lurked. Vance might be guilty, or he might be a distraction, his obviousness a shield for another's cunning. She thought of a village scandal, where a loud-mouthed farmer had been blamed for theft, only for the true culprit, a quiet widow, to be revealed by a single careless word. The SS Aurora, she mused, was a village afloat, and its secrets would surface, given time and care. With a small smile, she prepared for bed, her mind already weaving the next thread in the mystery of the missing pearl necklace. Chapter 4. The Steward's Discretion. The SS Aurora's corridors, usually alive with the soft patter of passengers' footsteps and the murmur of conversation, were hushed as the captain's search for the stolen pearl necklace continued into the early hours. Miss Jane Marple, having returned to her modest cabin, sat by the porthole, her knitting untouched on the small desk. The sea beyond shimmered under a sliver of moon, its calm surface belying the tension that now gripped the ship. Her notebook lay open, its pages filled with neat, spidery handwriting cataloguing the evening's observations. Mr. Harold Vance's too-ready alibi, bolstered by Miss Clara Dunn's nervous insistence, had occupied her thoughts. But now her mind turned to another figure. Thomas Reed, the steward, whose quiet efficiency masked a flicker of unease that Miss Marple's sharp eyes had not missed. Reed had been everywhere and nowhere during the gala, a shadow slipping between tables, refilling glasses, and adjusting napkins with a deference that made him nearly invisible. Yet Miss Marple, who had a knack for noticing those who preferred to go unnoticed, had seen him pause near the saloon doors just as Lady Beatrice's cry of theft rang out. His hands, usually steady, had trembled as he stacked a tray, and his glance toward Captain Stokes held a fleeting intensity that spoke of more than routine concern. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had known a gardener's boy who moved with the same silent diligence, always present yet overlooked, until a missing silver tray traced back to his pocket. Reed, she suspected, was a man who saw more than he said, and perhaps knew more than he wished. The next morning, the ship's routine resumed with a strained normalcy. Passengers gathered in the dining saloon for breakfast, their chatter subdued, their eyes darting to the empty chair where Lady Beatrice usually sat. Miss Marple, seated near a window with a view of the deck, sipped her tea and watched the comings and goings. Reed was there, moving among the tables with his usual precision, but she noted a slight hesitation in his step, a momentary pause as he passed the captain's table. Stokes, immaculate in his uniform, was deep in conversation with the purser, Mr. Langley, his voice low but authoritative. Miss Marple's ears, attuned to the nuances of tone, caught a note of impatience in the captain's words, as if the search's lack of progress gnawed at him. She decided to observe Reed more closely. After breakfast, she lingered on the promenade deck, where passengers strolled in the morning sun, their furs and hats a colourful contrast to the sea's endless blue. Reed appeared, carrying a stack of linens toward the cabins, his head bowed as if to avoid notice. Miss Marple, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, approached him with the air of a kindly aunt seeking assistance. "Mr. Reed, is it?" she said, her voice soft but clear. "I wonder if you might help me. My cabin door seems to stick a little. Could you take a look?" Reed's eyes flicked up, and for a moment Miss Marple saw a wariness there, quickly masked by a polite nod. "Of course, ma'am. I'll see to it right away." As they walked toward her cabin, she chatted idly about the ship's comforts, her tone disarming. "You must see so much working here," she remarked. "All the comings and goings. It's a wonder you keep track of it all." Reed's smile was tight. "It's my job, ma'am. I don't pay much mind to what passengers do." His words were careful, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his grip on the linens. At her cabin, Reed examined the door, which, in truth, worked perfectly. As he tested the latch, Miss Marple stood nearby, her eyes taking in his movements. "It must be difficult," she said, With all this fuss about Lady Beatrice's necklace, you were in the saloon last night, weren't you? Did you notice anything odd?" Reed's hand paused on the doorknob, and he shook his head. "Nothing, ma'am. I was busy with my duties. Didn't see anything out of the ordinary." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a faint tremor, a hesitation that reminded her of a village lad denying he'd been near the orchard when apples went missing. She thanked him and let him go, but her mind was busy. Reed's access to the cabins was undeniable. As steward, he held a master key, a fact the captain had mentioned. Yet his nervousness suggested he was hiding something, not necessarily guilt, but knowledge. Miss Marple recalled a conversation overheard in the lounge the previous evening, when a junior officer had mentioned seeing Reed near the officers' quarters during the gala, a place he had no reason to be. Why linger there, unless to watch or avoid someone? She jotted a note in her book: "Reed, officers' quarters, uneasy under questioning." Later that morning, Miss Marple joined a group of passengers in the lounge, where the theft remained the topic of choice. The Colonel's wife, Mrs. Langley, was holding court, her voice sharp with indignation. "It's that steward, mark my words," she said, fanning herself. "Always creeping about, isn't he? And with a key to every cabin." Her husband, the Colonel, grunted agreement, but Miss Marple noted that their suspicion, like that against Vance, was based on little more than opportunity. She listened, her expression one of polite interest as others chimed in. Some defending Reed, others pointing to his quiet demeanour as proof of deceit. A new piece of information emerged when Miss Clara Dunn, looking pale and drawn, joined the group. "I heard," she said hesitantly, "that the steward was seen near Lady Beatrice's cabin last night, before the dancing." The room buzzed, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Clara's statement, offered so tentatively, felt rehearsed, as if meant to shift attention from Vance. Miss Marple approached her later as they stood by the lounge windows. "My dear," she said, "you seem so troubled by this theft. That comment about the steward. Did you see him yourself?" Clara flushed, her fingers twisting her bracelet. "No, I just heard it from someone. I don't remember who." Her eyes avoided Miss Marple's, and the older woman nodded, storing the detail away. As the day wore on, Miss Marple sought out the junior officer who had mentioned Reed's presence near the officers' quarters. She found him on the upper deck, polishing brass fittings. "Young man," she said, her smile disarming, "you mentioned seeing Mr. Reed last night near the officers' quarters. Was that during the gala?" The officer, a lanky youth named Carter, looked surprised but nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He was just standing there, looking toward the cabins. Thought it odd, since his duties were in the saloon." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning over this new thread. Reed's presence in an unusual place, combined with his unease, suggested he had seen or done something he wished to conceal. By afternoon, the captain announced that the cabin searches had yielded nothing, though Miss Marple noted his clipped tone, as if the failure irritated him. She wondered if his haste to search was meant to deflect attention from the crew, or himself. Reed, meanwhile, continued his duties, his face a mask of calm, but Miss Marple saw him glance repeatedly towards the captain's table during luncheon. It was a small thing, But in St. Mary Mead, small things often led to larger truths. A housemaid's glance at a forbidden lover, a shopkeeper's pause before answering a question. Such were the clues that unravelled secrets. Miss Marple returned to her cabin, her notebook growing fuller. She added "read" near officers' quarters, Clara's rumour. The steward's discretion, she thought, was a shield, but whether it protected himself or another remained unclear. The ship, with its polished surfaces and hidden corners, was a microcosm of human nature, and Miss Marple knew that patience would reveal its truths. As the SS Aurora sailed on, she settled into her chair, her eyes on the sea, her mind weaving the next piece of the puzzle, certain that Reed's silence held a key to the missing pearls. Chapter 5. The Jeweller's Expertise. The SS Aurora steamed steadily through the Mediterranean, its decks bathed in the golden light of late morning. The air was warm, carrying the faint salt tang of the sea, and passengers sought shade under awnings or lingered in the cool of the lounge, their conversations still dominated by the theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace. Miss Jane Marple, seated on the promenade deck with her knitting in her lap, appeared to be absorbed in the rhythmic click of her needles, but her sharp eyes missed little. The ship's routine had resumed, yet an undercurrent of suspicion rippled through every glance and whisper, and Miss Marple's mind was busy sifting the threads of the mystery. Her attention now turned to Mr. Leonard Grayson, the jeweller, whose polished charm and expert knowledge had made him a figure of interest among the passengers. Grayson had appraised Lady Beatrice's necklace before the gala, a fact he had mentioned with casual pride during a pre-dinner conversation. Miss Marple, who had a knack for spotting calculation behind charm, had noted his smooth manner. A little too smooth, perhaps, like a village solicitor she had once known, whose flattery hid a penchant for overcharging. Grayson's expertise in gems, she thought, could be a tool for more than appraisal, and his detachment during the theft's aftermath struck her as curiously deliberate. She had observed him that morning in the lounge, where he held court among a small group of ladies, his slim fingers gesturing as he described the rarity of pearls from the South Seas. His voice was low and engaging, his dark eyes bright with enthusiasm, yet Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance he cast toward the captain's table, where Stokes was reviewing papers with the purser. It was a look of assessment, not fear, and it piqued her curiosity. A man like Grayson, she mused, knew the value of appearances, and his calm in the face of the theft suggested either innocence or a confidence born of cunning. Miss Marple decided to engage him directly. She found him later on the upper deck, leaning against the railing, a cigarette case in hand, his tailored suit impeccable despite the sea breeze. "Mr. Grayson," she said, approaching with her usual air of mild inquiry, "I've been so fascinated by your talk of pearls. You must find this theft quite a puzzle, with your knowledge of such things." Grayson turned, his smile immediate and warm. "Miss Marple, isn't it? Yes, a dreadful business. Those pearls were exquisite, matched for size and lustre, a rare set. It's a loss to the world of gems, not just to Lady Beatrice." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple's ears caught a practised note, as if he had rehearsed the sentiment. "You saw the necklace up close, I believe," she continued, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "When you appraised it for Lady Beatrice, were they as fine as everyone says?" Grayson's smile widened, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, quite exceptional. I'd say they were worth a small fortune, though I'd need to see them again to be precise." He paused, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Of course, now they're gone, that's rather difficult." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly interest. "It must be frustrating, for someone who appreciates such beauty, to think of them in the wrong hands. Have you any theories about the thief?" Grayson shrugged, his nonchalance almost too perfect. "Could be anyone, I suppose. A passenger with debts, a crewman with opportunity. Thieves are clever, Miss Marple, but they often slip up." His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted a faint edge, as if he were testing her reaction. She smiled, recalling a village jeweller who had spoken with similar ease while selling paste gems as diamonds. Expertise, she knew, could be a mask for deceit. As Grayson excused himself to join a card game, Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind turning over their exchange. Grayson's knowledge gave him an advantage a common thief would lack. He would know how to assess, handle, and perhaps even replicate a necklace like Lady Beatrice's. She recalled a snippet of conversation she had overheard in the lounge the previous evening, when Grayson had mentioned replicas to a fellow passenger, dismissing it as a professional jest. At the time it had seemed innocuous, but now it lingered in her thoughts, like a dropped stitch in a pattern. She sought out the passenger who had heard Grayson's remark, a Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the Colonel's wife, who was fond of gossip and thus a useful source. Miss Marple found her in the library, leafing through a novel with little attention. "Mrs. Carter," she said, settling beside her, "I was just thinking of your chat with Mr. Grayson last night. He mentioned something about replicas, didn't he? Such an interesting topic." Mrs. Carter's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Oh, yes. He was going on about how easy it is to make fake pearls these days. So good you'd hardly know the difference. Said it's a trick of the trade, though he laughed it off. Why, do you think it means something?" Miss Marple smiled, deflecting the question. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, just curious. He's such a knowledgeable man." But her mind was alight. A jeweller skilled in replicas could, in theory, replace a real necklace with a fake, passing off the theft until the forgery was discovered. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a pawnbroker had swapped a lady's sapphire ring with a glass copy, the deception uncovered only when the ring was cleaned. Grayson's expertise, she suspected, might be a double-edged sword. Later, at luncheon, Miss Marple observed Grayson from across the dining saloon. He was seated with a group of passengers, his laughter easy, his gestures confident. Yet she noticed how his eyes flicked toward Lady Beatrice, who had joined the meal, her face drawn but composed. The captain, too, was watching Grayson, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple wondered if Stokes suspected the jeweller or was merely vigilant. She made a mental note to explore the captain's own behaviour further, for his haste in organising the search still struck her as peculiar. As the meal ended, Miss Marple lingered, her tea cooling as she listened to the passengers' chatter. A young officer passing her table mentioned that Grayson had been seen near the cabins during the gala, a detail he dismissed as unimportant. "He said he was lost looking for the smoking room," the officer added, shrugging. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind seized on the detail. Lost on a ship where signs clearly marked every passage? It was possible, but in her experience, such excuses often cloaked intent. She recalled a village curate who claimed to be lost in the vicar's garden, only to be found pilfering roses for his sweetheart. Returning to her cabin, Miss Marple opened her notebook and added, "Grayson, replicas, near cabins, confident." The jeweller's expertise was undeniable, but so was his poise, which could be the mark of an innocent man or a practiced deceiver. She thought of the necklace, its luminous pearls so easily concealed, and wondered if Grayson's knowledge extended to hiding as well as appraising. The SS Aurora, with its glittering surfaces and hidden corners, was a stage for human folly, and Miss Marple knew that Grayson's role, whether villain or bystander, would soon come into focus. As the ship sailed on, she closed her notebook, her eyes on the horizon, ready to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the missing pearls. Chapter 6. The Locked Cabin. The SS Aurora pressed forward through the Mediterranean, its steady hum a counterpoint to the unease that clung to its polished decks. The morning sun cast long shadows across the promenade, where passengers strolled with forced cheer, their conversations circling back to the theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a wicker chair near the ship's library, her knitting untouched, gazed out at the sea, her mind as active as the waves below. The threads of the mystery, Mr. Vance's dubious alibi, Reed's nervous reticence, Grayson's calculated charm, were beginning to form a pattern. But it was the scene of the crime itself that now drew her attention. Lady Beatrice's cabin, locked and supposedly secure, held secrets of its own, and Miss Marple resolved to examine it closely. The captain's search had yielded no trace of the necklace, a fact announced at breakfast with a curtness that suggested frustration. Miss Marple, however, was not surprised. A clever thief, she knew, would not leave such a prize in plain sight, and the cabin's lock, reportedly untouched, raised questions that demanded answers. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a locked pantry had been breached not by force, but by a forgotten latch, overlooked by all but the culprit. The Aurora's cabins, with their modern fittings, were no less vulnerable to human cunning, and Miss Marple suspected that the key to the mystery lay in the details of that small, elegant space. She sought permission to visit Lady Beatrice's cabin, approaching the purser, Mr. Langley, with her usual air of mild deference. "I do hope it's not too much trouble," she said, her eyes crinkling behind her spectacles. "But I'd feel so much better if I could see where this dreadful theft occurred. It's such a puzzle, isn't it?" Langley, harried but polite, agreed, escorting her to the first-class deck where Lady Beatrice's cabin stood. As they walked, Miss Marple noted the ship's layout, narrow corridors, polished brass, and the constant hum of activity from crew and passengers alike. A thief, she thought, would need to move with precision in such a busy place. The cabin, when they reached it, was a study in refined luxury. Mahogany panelling gleamed under soft lighting, and a velvet-upholstered chair sat beside a small dressing table, its mirror reflecting a porthole view of the sea. The bed was neatly made, its silk coverlet undisturbed, and a faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Lady Beatrice, who had joined them at the purser's request, stood by the door, her face pale but composed. "It was there," she said, pointing to the dressing table, "on that velvet tray. I left it just before the dancing, locked the door, and was gone no more than 15 minutes. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The lock, a sturdy brass affair, showed no scratches or signs of tampering, as the purser had reported. She approached the dressing table, noting its position near the porthole, which was small but open, admitting a faint breeze. "This window," she said, her tone curious rather than accusing. "Was it open when you returned?" Lady Beatrice frowned, then nodded. "Yes, I believe so. It's so warm. I often leave it ajar for air." Miss Marple peered out of the porthole, its diameter barely a foot, and considered the possibility of entry. A slim figure, perhaps, or a tool deftly used could manage it, though the timing, during the gala's bustle, would require audacity. She turned her attention to the lock, asking Langley to demonstrate its mechanism. He obliged, inserting a key and turning it with a satisfying click. "Only 2 keys exist," he said. "Lady Beatrice has one, and the steward, Mr. Reed, has the master key for all cabins." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Reed's nervous demeanour. A master key offered opportunity, but so did an open porthole, and she wondered which avenue a thief might choose. She recalled a village burglary where a locked door had been bypassed through a coal chute, the simplest path often being the most overlooked. Stepping back, Miss Marple examined the cabin's layout. The dressing table stood against the outer wall, its tray empty save for a silver hairbrush and a vial of perfume. The wardrobe, its doors slightly ajar, revealed rows of silk gowns, and a small writing desk held a few letters and a photograph of a stern-faced man, Lady Beatrice's late husband, perhaps. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet Miss Marple's instincts told her that the cabin held more than it revealed. She thanked Lady Beatrice and the purser, her smile as unassuming as ever, and returned to the deck, her notebook beckoning. In her cabin she jotted down, "Cabin, lock intact, porthole open, timing tight." The theft's precision intrigued her. The gala had been a whirl of activity, with passengers and crew moving constantly. A thief would need not only access but confidence, slipping in and out unnoticed in a mere quarter of an hour. She thought of Mr. Grayson, the jeweller, whose expertise might include the finesse to navigate a lock or porthole, and Mr. Vance, whose presence near the cabin suggested opportunity, if not motive. Reed with his master key remained a possibility, though his unease seemed more that of a witness than a culprit. At luncheon, Miss Marple overheard a conversation that sharpened her focus. 2 officers, seated nearby, discussed the cabin searches, one mentioning a small tool found in a crewman's quarters, a jeweller's loop, mislaid, they assumed, by a passenger. Miss Marple's ears pricked up. A loop was Grayson's tool, and its presence among the crew raised questions. She made a mental note to inquire further, perhaps through the chatty Mrs. Carter, who seemed to know every scrap of gossip on board. As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple joined a group of passengers for tea in the lounge, where the theft remained the sole topic. Mrs. Carter, fanning herself, speculated wildly. "It must have been someone who knew the cabin," she said. "That lock wasn't forced, so it's either the steward or someone awfully clever." Her husband, the colonel, grunted, "Or someone with a key we don't know about." Miss Marple listened, her expression one of polite interest, but her mind was elsewhere. A key, a porthole, or a sleight of hand, each was possible, but the thief's boldness was the true clue. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead theft, where a locked shed had been entered through a loose panel, the thief's audacity outstripping their caution. Returning to her cabin, Miss Marple sat by the porthole, her notebook open. She added, "Loop, crew quarters, Grayson." The cabin's locked door and open porthole formed a paradox, one that pointed to a thief with both opportunity and skill. The SS Aurora, with its gleaming surfaces and hidden passages, was a stage for deception, and Miss Marple knew that the truth lay in the smallest details. A tool, a glance, a moment's hesitation. As the ship sailed toward its next port, she closed her notebook, her eyes on the horizon, certain that the locked cabin would yield its secrets in time. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Lounge. The SS Aurora sailed smoothly through the Mediterranean, its decks bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. The sea stretched endlessly, a mirror of calm that belied the undercurrent of tension among the passengers. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had cast a pall over the ship, and the lounge, usually a haven of lively chatter, was now a crucible of speculation and suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a cushioned armchair near a large window, her knitting resting idly in her lap, observed the scene with her customary quiet acuity. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, moved from face to face, noting the tightened lips, the furtive glances, and the whispered theories that swirled like eddies in the ship's wake. The lounge was a spacious room, its walls adorned with nautical paintings and its tables set with silver tea services. Passengers gathered in small clusters, their voices low but insistent, as if each sought to solve the mystery before the captain's investigation could. Miss Marple, who had a knack for hearing what was not meant to be heard, listened as Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the Colonel's wife, held forth near the tea trolley. "It's that Vance, I'm sure of it," she declared, her fan fluttering. "Always at the card tables, losing more than he can afford. Those pearls would settle a debt or two." Her husband, Colonel Carter, nodded, his moustache twitching. "Man's got no scruples. Seen his type before. Bold as brass, but desperate underneath." Miss Marple's expression remained one of mild interest, but her mind was alert. Vance's gambling habits were no secret, and his presence near Lady Beatrice's cabin had fueled the gossip mill. Yet she wondered if the focus on him was too convenient, a distraction from other possibilities. She recalled a St. Mary Mead scandal, where a loud-mouthed baker had been blamed for a theft, only for the true culprit, a quiet seamstress, to be revealed by a single misplaced thread. The lounge's whispers, she thought, were like that thread, pointing to truths half hidden by assumption. Across the room, Mr. Leonard Grayson, the jeweller, sipped coffee with an air of detached amusement, his slim fingers toying with a gold watch chain. He had joined a group of ladies, his charm as polished as the ship's brass fittings, but Miss Marple noted how his eyes flicked toward the door whenever an officer passed. She had not forgotten his mention of replicas, or the jeweller's loop found in the crew quarters, a detail that lingered in her notebook like an unresolved chord. Grayson's expertise, she mused, could make him a master of deception, though his calm suggested either innocence or a confidence born of cunning. Nearby, Thomas Reed, the steward, moved silently, clearing cups with a deference that made him nearly invisible. Miss Marple watched him, recalling his unease when questioned about the gala night and his unexplained presence near the officers' quarters. His master key gave him access to every cabin, a fact that hung over him like a shadow. Yet his nervousness seemed less that of a thief than of a man caught in a web not of his making. She thought of a village boy in St. Mary Mead, always quick to please, who had known of a theft, but stayed silent out of fear. Reed, she suspected, might be such a figure, holding a piece of the puzzle he dared not share. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a young officer, Mr. Carter, who had spoken of seeing Grayson near the cabins during the gala. He entered the lounge, his face flushed from the sun, and paused to speak with a fellow officer. Miss Marple, with her knack for gentle inquiry, rose and approached him, her shawl trailing softly. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby, "I do hope I'm not intruding. You mentioned seeing Mr. Grayson near the cabins last night. Could you tell me a little more? It's such a curious detail." Carter, caught off guard but disarmed by her kindly demeanour, nodded. "It was during the dancing, ma'am. I saw him in the corridor near Lady Beatrice's cabin. He said he was looking for the smoking room, but it's on the other side of the ship. I thought it odd, but he seemed unconcerned." Miss Marple smiled, thanking him, and returned to her seat, her mind turning over this new piece. Grayson's excuse, like Vance's alibi, felt too pat, too easily offered. She recalled a village grocer who claimed to be lost in a neighbour's garden, only to be found pilfering apples. Missteps, she knew, often revealed intent. The lounge grew livelier as more passengers arrived, their conversations a tapestry of speculation. Miss Clara Dunn, pale and fidgety, sat alone near a potted palm, her eyes darting toward Vance, who was now at the card tables, his laughter loud but forced. Miss Marple noted Clara's isolation, wondering if her loyalty to Vance was wavering under the weight of suspicion. She approached, her manner as gentle as ever. "My dear," she said, settling beside Clara, "you look quite worn out. This theft has everyone on edge, hasn't it? I suppose you were with Mr. Vance all evening, as you said." Clara's fingers twisted her bracelet, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Miss Marple. We were together, at the tables, then dancing. He couldn't have done it." Her words lacked conviction, and Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the flicker of doubt in her expression. "Of course," she said, patting Clara's hand. "It's just that people do talk, and one must be clear. You didn't see anyone else near the cabins, did you?" Clara shook her head, but her hesitation spoke volumes. Miss Marple made a mental note. Clara's alibi for Vance was fraying, and her silence might conceal more than loyalty. As the afternoon waned, Captain Stokes entered the lounge, his uniform crisp, but his face etched with strain. He spoke briefly with the purser, then addressed the room, his voice carrying authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, the search continues, but I assure you we are thorough. I ask for your patience and urge anyone with information to come forward." His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Vance, then Grayson, before moving on. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the protective edge in his tone when he mentioned the crew. Was he shielding someone, she wondered, or simply maintaining order? She recalled a village constable, fiercely loyal to his men, who had overlooked a theft to protect a favourite. Stokes's haste, she thought, might stem from more than duty. A new whisper caught her ear, as Mrs. Carter, ever the gossip, leaned toward a companion. "I heard the captain and Lady Beatrice had words a few days ago," she said, her voice low but audible. Something about the ship's route, though no one knows why she cared. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked had she been knitting, for this was a fresh thread. A dispute between the captain and the victim suggested a personal connection, one that might colour his handling of the case. She filed it away, alongside Grayson's wanderings, Reed's unease, and Vance's shaky alibi. As the lounge emptied for dinner, Miss Marple remained, her notebook open in her lap. She jotted down, Grayson, cabin's excuse weak, Stokes, dispute with Beatrice, Clara, doubtful. The lounge, with its polished surfaces and murmured secrets, was a microcosm of human nature. And Miss Marple knew that whispers often led to truths. The theft, she sensed, was not just about pearls, but about the desires and fears that drove people to act. In St. Mary Mead, she had unravelled many such tangles, and the SS Aurora, for all its grandeur, was no different. As the ship sailed on, she closed her notebook, her eyes on the fading light, ready to follow the next whisper to its source. Chapter 8. A Glimpse of Motive. The SS Aurora glided through the Mediterranean's deepening dusk, its lights twinkling against the velvet sea. The ship's grandeur, with its polished decks and gleaming brass, seemed to mock the unease that had settled over its passengers. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace remained unsolved, and the air in the dining saloon, where passengers gathered for dinner, was thick with suspicion and half-spoken theories. Miss Jane Marple, seated at a small table near the orchestra, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, observed the scene with her usual quiet vigilance. Her knitting lay untouched, her hands folded in her lap, but her mind was as busy as the ship's engines, weaving together the threads of the mystery. The dining saloon was a spectacle of crystal and silver, yet the mood was subdued. Lady Beatrice, pale but regal in a sapphire gown, sat at the captain's table, her bare throat a silent testament to her loss. Captain Stokes, his uniform impeccable, spoke with forced joviality, as if to dispel the tension. Mr. Harold Vance, his ruddy face flushed with wine, laughed too loudly at his own jests, while Miss Clara Dunn, seated beside him, picked at her food, her eyes darting nervously. Thomas Reed, the steward, moved among the tables with his customary deference, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hands as he poured coffee. Mr. Leonard Grayson, the jeweller, dined alone, his slim fingers cutting his meal with precision, his expression one of calm detachment that bordered on indifference. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to motive, the hidden engine that drove every crime. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen thefts sparked by greed, envy, or desperation, and the Aurora, for all its elegance, was no different. Vance's gambling debts were the subject of much speculation, his brash demeanour doing little to quell the whispers. Reed's access to the cabins, coupled with his uneasy glances, suggested he might know more than he admitted. Grayson's expertise and his casual mention of replicas hinted at a subtler form of cunning, and the captain's haste, coupled with rumours of a dispute with Lady Beatrice, raised questions about his impartiality. Motive, Miss Marple knew, was the key to unravelling the knot, and she resolved to seek it out, as carefully as she would a dropped stitch in her knitting. After dinner, as passengers drifted to the lounge for coffee and liqueurs, Miss Marple sought out a quieter corner of the ship. The library, where the soft glow of lamps and the scent of leather-bound books offered a respite from the saloon's clamour. There, she encountered a maid, Jenny, a young woman with a quick smile and a penchant for chatter, who was dusting the shelves. Miss Marple, ever adept at drawing out confidences, remarked on the ship's fine upkeep. "You must see so much, Jenny, working behind the scenes. I suppose you hear all sorts of things about the passengers?" Jenny's eyes brightened, and she leaned closer, her voice low. "Oh, ma'am, you wouldn't believe the stories. That Mr. Grayson, for instance, he's not as grand as he seems. I heard from one of the crew that his shop in London's been struggling. Nearly bankrupt, they say, though you'd never guess it from his airs." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of kindly interest, but her mind seized the detail. Financial trouble was a powerful motive, one she had seen drive respectable men to desperate acts in St. Mary Mead. A jeweller in debt, with access to a priceless necklace, might see theft as salvation. "Thank you, my dear," Miss Marple said, patting Jenny's hand. "You've been most helpful." As the maid moved on, Miss Marple opened her notebook, adding, "Grayson, financial trouble motive." The information fit neatly with his expertise and his presence near the cabins, forming a pattern that was both compelling and incomplete. She thought of a village merchant, once trusted, who had pilfered church funds to save his failing business. Grayson's polish, she suspected, might conceal a similar desperation. Her next opportunity came at the lounge, where the passengers' chatter had grown bolder with the evening's wine. She settled near Mrs. Evelyn Carter, whose gossip was as reliable as it was indiscreet. "Mrs. Carter," Miss Marple began, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze, "I've been thinking about poor Lady Beatrice. I heard she and the captain had a disagreement recently. Do you know anything about it?" Mrs. Carter's fan paused, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal. "Oh, yes, it was a few days ago, in the saloon. Something about the ship's route. She wanted to stop at a small port, but Captain Stokes refused. Got quite heated, I heard, though no one knows why she cared so much about some out-of-the-way place." Miss Marple's needles would have clicked had she been knitting, for this was a thread worth following. A dispute, however trivial, suggested a connection between victim and investigator that might colour the captain's actions. She recalled a St. Mary Mead squabble, where a vicar's insistence on a particular hymn had masked a deeper grievance. Stokes's haste to search the cabin, she thought, might stem from a desire to protect his authority, or to conceal a personal stake. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple sought out Mr. Vance, hoping to probe his financial state. She found him at the card tables, his laughter forced, his eyes bloodshot. "Mr. Vance," she said, approaching with her usual disarming smile, "you seem to enjoy the games. I suppose they're a welcome distraction from all this fuss about the necklace." Vance's grin was strained. "A man needs some amusement, Miss Marple. No harm in a few hands, though the stakes here are nothing compared to Monte Carlo." His tone was jovial, but Miss Marple caught a defensive edge, as if he sensed the whispers about his debts. "Oh, I'm sure," she said, "though one hears such stories about gambling losses, I do hope you're not troubled by such things." Vance's laugh was sharp. "Stories, Miss Marple, nothing more. I'm as solid as this ship." But his hand shook slightly as he dealt a card, and Miss Marple noted it, recalling a village shopkeeper who boasted of prosperity while his creditors closed in. She thanked him and moved on, adding to her notebook, Vance, defensive, debts likely. His bravado, she thought, was a fragile shield. Her final encounter came unexpectedly, as she passed Reed in a quiet corridor near the crew quarters. He was carrying a tray of linens, his face pale under the dim lights. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice soft, "you must be exhausted with all this extra work. Did you notice anything unusual near the officers' quarters during the gala?" "I heard you were seen there." Reed's eyes widened, and he nearly dropped the tray. I was just passing through, ma'am. Checking supplies, nothing more." His voice was tight, and Miss Marple saw fear in his gaze, not guilt. She smiled, letting him go, but added to her notebook, "Reed, fearful, hiding something?" As the Aurora sailed on, Miss Marple returned to her cabin, her notebook heavy with new entries. Grayson, financial trouble, Stokes, dispute, Vance, debts, Reed, fearful. Motives were emerging, each tied to a human frailty, greed, pride, or fear. She thought of Saint Mary Mead, where motives had unravelled many a mystery, and knew the Aurora's secrets would do the same. Closing her notebook, she gazed out her porthole, the sea a dark mirror of the truths she sought, ready to follow the next thread in the tapestry of the missing pearls. Chapter 9. The False Trail. The SS. Aurora sailed through a Mediterranean dawn, its decks awash with pale light that softened the ship's polished edges. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a clear day. But the atmosphere among the passengers remained clouded with suspicion. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had woven a web of distrust, and every glance, every whispered word, seemed to tighten its threads. Miss Jane Marple, seated on the promenade deck with a cup of tea, her shawl tucked neatly around her, appeared to be savouring the morning's calm. Yet her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, missed nothing, and her mind was busy untangling the motives that had surfaced. Mr. Vance's debts, Mr. Grayson's financial straits, Mr. Reed's fearful silence, and Captain Stokes's curious haste. The morning brought a new development, announced by the captain during breakfast in the dining saloon. His voice, steady but strained, cut through the clatter of cutlery. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing at the head of the room, "we have found a clue in our search for the stolen necklace. A single pearl, matching those of Lady Beatrice's set, was discovered near Mr. Vance's cabin late last night." A gasp rippled through the room, and all eyes turned to Vance, who sat frozen, his ruddy face paling. Miss Clara Dunn, beside him, clutched her napkin, her eyes wide with alarm. Miss Marple's expression remained one of mild surprise, but her thoughts raced. A pearl, so conveniently found, was a bold stroke. Too bold, perhaps. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen brooch had been found in a gardener's shed, only to be revealed as a plant to mislead the village constable. Evidence, she knew, could be as deceptive as a smile, and this pearl felt like a thread deliberately dropped to mislead. Captain Stokes continued, his tone authoritative. "We are investigating this discovery thoroughly. Mr. Vance has agreed to assist us, and I ask that you refrain from speculation until we have more facts." His words were firm, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, as if the find bolstered his command. She wondered if the captain's eagerness to pin the theft on Vance was driven by convenience, or something deeper, perhaps tied to the rumoured dispute with Lady Beatrice. As the passengers dispersed, Miss Marple sought out the purser, Mr. Langley, who had overseen the search. She found him near the purser's office, his face weary from late-night duties. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice gentle, "that pearl is quite a find. Could I see it, do you think? I've always been so fond of pearls." Langley, disarmed by her kindly demeanour, hesitated, then nodded. "It's locked away, ma'am, but I can show you. It's just one pearl, but it matches Lady Beatrice's description." In the purser's office, he produced a small velvet pouch and tipped the pearl into his palm. It was luminous, perfectly round, and gleamed with a soft sheen. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied it. "How beautiful!" she murmured. But her mind was elsewhere. The pearl's lustre was fine, yet something about it, perhaps a subtle flatness in its glow, struck her as odd. She recalled Mr. Grayson's talk of replicas, and a suspicion took root. "Was it found just as it is?" she asked. Langley nodded. "On the floor, near Mr. Vance's cabin door. Could have fallen from the necklace during the theft." Miss Marple thanked him and returned to the deck, her notebook beckoning. She wrote, "Pearl, near Vance's cabin, possible fake." The find was too neat, too perfectly timed to shift suspicion onto Vance. She thought of a village ruse where a stolen watch had been planted in a rival's barn, only to be exposed as a forgery by a jeweller's keen eye. Grayson, with his expertise, would know how to craft such a deception, and his calm detachment suggested a man unworried by the investigation's progress. Seeking to test her theory, Miss Marple joined a group of passengers in the lounge, where the pearl's discovery dominated conversation. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, fanning herself vigorously, was in her element. "It's as good as proof," she declared. "Vance was near the cabins, and now this pearl turns up at his door. What more do you need?" Her husband, Colonel Carter, grunted agreement, but Miss Marple noted the eagerness in their voices, as if they welcomed a simple solution. She listened, her expression one of polite interest, but her thoughts were on the pearl's authenticity and the hand that might have placed it. She sought out Lady Beatrice, finding her in a quiet corner of the lounge, her face drawn but composed. "Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple said, settling beside her, "this pearl they've found, do you think it's truly one of yours?" Lady Beatrice's eyes clouded with doubt. "It looks like mine, from what I saw, but I couldn't be sure without seeing the whole strand. They were so perfectly matched, you see." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple patted her hand, noting the genuine grief in her tone. A fake pearl, she thought, would be a cruel twist, but one a skilled jeweller might manage. Later, Miss Marple approached a junior officer, Mr. Carter, who had been involved in the search. "Young man," she said, her smile disarming, "that pearl was such a curious find. Was it just lying there, in plain sight?" Carter nodded, his face earnest. "Right by Mr. Vance's door, ma'am, in a corner of the corridor. Almost missed it, but it caught the light." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning to the timing. A pearl dropped during a theft would likely be noticed sooner, not hours later. It felt staged, a deliberate misdirection. Her suspicions led her back to Grayson. She found him on the upper deck, smoking a cigarette and gazing at the sea. "Mr. Grayson," she said, approaching with her usual mildness, "this pearl they've found is quite the talk. As a jeweller, you must have an opinion on it." Grayson's smile was smooth, but his eyes flickered. "A fine piece, I'm sure, though I haven't seen it closely. If it's from Lady Beatrice's necklace, it's a clue. But pearls can be tricky. Not all are what they seem. His words were casual, but Miss Marple caught a note of caution, as if he were guarding a secret. She pressed gently, her tone conversational. "You mentioned replicas once, didn't you? Could someone make a pearl so convincing it might fool even Lady Beatrice?" Grayson's smile tightened. "It's possible, with skill. But why bother, unless you're planning something clever?" He laughed, but it was a hollow sound, and Miss Marple noted the bead of sweat on his brow despite the cool breeze. She thanked him and moved on, adding to her notebook, "Grayson knows replicas, uneasy." As evening fell, Miss Marple reflected on the pearl's discovery. It was a false trail, she was certain, designed to point fingers at Vance while shielding the true thief. Grayson's expertise made him a likely candidate, but Reed's access and the captain's haste could not be ignored. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Mystery, where a stolen locket had been planted to frame a maid, only for the true thief, a trusted neighbor, to betray themselves with a careless word. The Aurora's false pearl, she sensed, was such a locket, and its placer would soon make a similar mistake. Returning to her cabin, Miss Marple sat by the porthole, her notebook open. She wrote, "Pearl planted, Grayson likely, Vance framed." The ship's hum was a steady reminder of time passing, and she knew the thief's confidence would falter as the net tightened. The Aurora, with its glittering surfaces and hidden motives, was a stage for human folly, and Miss Marple was ready to watch the next act unfold, her mind as sharp as the sea's horizon. Chapter 10. The Jeweller's Slip. The SS Aurora sailed under a sky of deepening indigo, the Mediterranean's calm surface reflecting the first stars of evening. The ship's decks, usually alive with the chatter of passengers, were hushed, as if the unsolved theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had cast a spell of caution over all aboard. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the lounge with a cup of chamomile tea, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, appeared to be lost in thought, her eyes resting on the distant horizon. Yet her mind was as sharp as ever, piecing together the puzzle's fragments. The planted pearl near Mr. Vance's cabin, Thomas Reed's fearful reticence, Captain Stokes's protective haste, and most pressingly, Mr. Leonard Grayson's polished expertise, which seemed to shimmer with hidden intent. The discovery of the single pearl had sharpened the passengers' suspicions, with most pointing to Vance as the thief. Yet Miss Marple, whose instincts had unravelled many a village deception, was convinced the pearl was a ruse, a fake meant to mislead. Grayson, with his knowledge of replicas and his financial troubles, was the thread she now followed, for his calm demeanour and casual remarks about forgeries suggested a man too confident for innocence. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead jeweller who had swapped a lady's emerald for glass, his charm disarming all until a single careless boast betrayed him. Grayson, she thought, might be poised for such a slip. Determined to test her theory, Miss Marple sought an opportunity to speak with Grayson alone. She found him the next morning on the promenade deck, where he stood by the railing, a cigarette in hand, his tailored suit as impeccable as ever. The sea breeze ruffled his dark hair, and his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of wariness beneath their usual charm. "Mr. Grayson," she said, approaching with her disarming smile, "I've so enjoyed your stories about gems. You must find this business with the pearl quite fascinating. Such a curious clue, don't you think?" Grayson's smile was immediate, but it lacked warmth. Indeed, Miss Marple. A single pearl is a tantalizing hint, though it proves little. Pearls are slippery things. Easy to lose, easier to fake. His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught a slight pause, as if he were choosing his words with care. She nodded, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Oh, yes, you mentioned replicas before. It's remarkable how skilled craftsmen can make something so convincing. I suppose you've seen many such fakes in your work?" Grayson's fingers tightened briefly on his cigarette. "A few," he said, his tone light but guarded. "It takes a trained eye to spot them, but I've handled enough to know the difference. Lady Beatrice's pearls, though, they were the real thing. I appraised them myself, you know, before the gala." His words were meant to impress, but Miss Marple noted the emphasis on his appraisal, as if he were reinforcing his authority. She recalled a village doctor who boasted of his diagnoses, only to be found covering a mistake. Expertise, she knew, could be a shield for error or deceit. "That must have been a privilege," she said, her voice soft, "to handle such a treasure so closely. Did you examine them long?" Grayson hesitated, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Not long, just enough to confirm their value. Perfectly matched, exceptional luster. A pity they're gone." His words came quickly, and Miss Marple saw a bead of sweat on his brow, despite the cool air. She pressed gently, her tone as mild as ever. "And that pearl they found near Mr. Vance's cabin, do you think it's one of hers? I heard it was quite fine, but I'm no expert." Grayson's eyes narrowed, and he stubbed out his cigarette with a sharp movement. "I haven't seen it closely," he said, "but if it matches her set, it's a clue, though, as I said, pearls can deceive." His voice held a note of irritation, and Miss Marple smiled inwardly. She had touched a nerve, and in St. Mary Mead such moments often signalled a crack in a carefully constructed facade. "Of course," she said, "you'd know better than anyone. Thank you, Mr. Grayson." She excused herself, leaving him to his thoughts, and added to her notebook, "Grayson, defensive on pearl, appraisal private." Her next move was to verify the pearl's authenticity, for she suspected it was the key to Grayson's role. She sought out the purser, Mr. Langley, in his office, where the pearl was kept under lock and key. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice tinged with the hesitancy of an elderly lady, "I wonder if I might see that pearl again. It's such a curious thing, and I do love a mystery." Langley, accustomed to her gentle inquiries, agreed, producing the velvet pouch. The pearl, small and luminous, lay in his palm, its sheen catching the light. Miss Marple studied it closely, noting a faint irregularity in its surface, a lack of depth in its glow. "It's lovely," she said, "but is it quite as fine as Lady Beatrice's? I'm no jeweller, of course." Langley frowned, uncertain. "It matches her description, ma'am, but we'd need an expert to be sure." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicion growing. A fake pearl, planted to frame Vance, would require skill only someone like Grayson could provide. She thanked Langley and returned to the deck, her mind turning to the appraisal Grayson had conducted. He had handled the necklace alone, a detail Lady Beatrice had mentioned in passing. Such privacy, Miss Marple thought, offered opportunity not just to appraise, but to plan. At luncheon, she observed Grayson from across the dining saloon. He was seated with a group of passengers, his laughter easy, but his eyes darted toward Lady Beatrice, who sat quietly, her face drawn. Miss Marple noted how he avoided the captain's gaze, as if wary of scrutiny. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Merchant, who, after stealing a silver candlestick, had avoided the vicar's eye at church. Avoidance, she knew, was often a sign of guilt, however well concealed. Seeking further insight, Miss Marple joined Mrs. Evelyn Carter in the lounge, where the gossip flowed as freely as the tea. "Mrs. Carter," she said, settling beside her, "you've such a knack for hearing things. Did Mr. Grayson ever mention his appraisal of the necklace? It must have been quite an event." Mrs. Carter's fan fluttered, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, yes. He was so proud of it. Said it took place in Lady Beatrice's cabin, just the two of them. He went on about the pearl's quality, but I thought he seemed a bit smug, as if he knew something we didn't." Miss Marple's needles would have clicked had she been knitting, for this confirmed Grayson's private access. A jeweller alone with a priceless necklace could do more than appraise. He could study, plan, even prepare a substitute. She thanked Mrs. Carter and added to her notebook, "Grayson, private appraisal, opportunity." The pattern was clearer now, but she needed more to unravel Grayson's role. That evening, as passengers gathered for a concert in the saloon, Miss Marple watched Grayson closely. He sat near the back, his fingers tapping restlessly on his knee, his smile fixed but strained. When a passenger mentioned the pearl's discovery, Grayson's response was quick. A clumsy thief dropping such a clue. His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple saw his hand clench, a small betrayal of tension. She thought of a village poacher who laughed off accusations, only to be caught with a rabbit in his bag. Grayson's slip, she sensed, was near. As the concert ended, Miss Marple lingered, her mind weaving the threads together. Grayson's expertise, his financial troubles, his private appraisal, and his unease about the pearl formed a compelling picture, but it was not yet complete. The Aurora, with its glittering surfaces and hidden motives, was a stage for deception, and Miss Marple knew that Grayson's next move would reveal more. She closed her notebook, her eyes on the starlit sea, ready to catch the jeweller's slip when it came. Chapter 11. The Trap. The SS. Aurora steamed through the Mediterranean under a sky ablaze with stars, its decks quiet save for the soft lapping of waves against the hull. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had tightened its grip on the ship's passengers, each whispered theory adding weight to the air of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cabin by the porthole, her shawl draped over her shoulders, pored over her notebook, its pages filled with careful observations. The planted pearl, Mr. Grayson's unease, Mr. Reed's fearful glances, and Captain Stokes's protective haste had woven a complex tapestry. But Miss Marple was certain the jeweller's slip, his defensive tone, when pressed about replicas, held the key. Now she resolved to set a trap, as delicate and precise as a spider's web, to catch the thief in his own misstep. Her plan required Lady Beatrice's cooperation, and Miss Marple sought her out the next morning in the lounge, where the widow sat alone, her sapphire eyes clouded with worry. "Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple said, settling beside her with a gentle smile, "this dreadful business must weigh heavily on you. I've been thinking perhaps a reward, offered discreetly, might encourage someone to return the necklace. People can be so tempted by such things." Lady Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "If it would bring my pearls back, I'd try anything. What do you suggest?" Miss Marple's tone was as soothing as a village tea party. "A quiet announcement, perhaps, saying you'll ask no questions if the necklace is returned by tonight. The captain could spread the word, and we'll see who stirs." Lady Beatrice agreed, and Miss Marple, with her knack for gentle persuasion, approached Captain Stokes at his table. "Captain," she said, her eyes crinkling behind her spectacles, "a reward might loosen tongues, or hands. It's worth a try, don't you think?" Stokes, though sceptical, consented, his voice gruff. "If it helps, I'll announce it. But I warn you, Miss Marple, thieves are cleverer than that." At luncheon, Stokes addressed the dining saloon, his voice carrying over the clink of cutlery. "Lady Beatrice has generously offered a reward for the return of her necklace, no questions asked. If anyone knows anything, they may leave it in her cabin by midnight." The room buzzed, passengers exchanging glances, but Miss Marple watched Grayson, seated alone, his fork pausing mid-air. His face remained composed, but his eyes flicked toward the captain, a fleeting shadow of calculation crossing his features. She added to her notebook, "Grayson, alert to reward." Miss Marple's trap was simple. A thief, confident in their deception, might attempt to return a fake necklace to claim the reward, believing the forgery would go unnoticed. She recalled a St. Mary Mead theft, where a stolen silver spoon was returned to the vicarage, only to be revealed as plated metal by a careful housemaid. Grayson, with his expertise in replicas, was the most likely to take the bait, and Miss Marple resolved to watch the cabins that night. As evening fell, she positioned herself on the promenade deck, near a shadowed alcove with a clear view of the first-class corridor leading to Lady Beatrice's cabin. The deck was quiet. Most passengers gathered for a dance in the saloon, their laughter a distant hum. Miss Marple, her shawl blending into the dusk, was as inconspicuous as a village spinster at a fete, yet her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She had enlisted a young officer, Mr. Carter, to keep watch from the opposite end, promising to alert the captain if anything occurred. The hours ticked by, the ship's rhythm steady. Then, near 11, a figure emerged from the shadows. Grayson, his slim form unmistakable, a small leather case tucked under his arm. He moved with purpose, glancing over his shoulder before pausing at Lady Beatrice's door. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her breathing slow. Grayson hesitated, then slipped a key from his pocket, a key that was not his own. With a deft movement, he opened the door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. Miss Marple signalled Carter, who hurried to fetch the captain. Moments later Stokes appeared, his face stern, and Miss Marple joined him, her voice low. "Captain, I believe Mr. Grayson is in the cabin now. He may be placing something there." Stokes's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, motioning for two officers to follow. They approached the cabin, and Stokes knocked sharply. "Mr. Grayson, open the door at once." The door swung open, revealing Grayson, his face pale but his smile quick. In his hand was a necklace, its pearls gleaming in the cabin's soft light. "Captain, I was just Lady Beatrice's offer. I found this in my luggage, must have been misplaced." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple saw the tension in his jaw. Stokes took the necklace, his expression unreadable. "Found, you say? We'll see about that." Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone mild. "May I see it, Captain? I do so admire pearls." Stokes handed her the strand, and she examined it closely, noting a faint dullness in its lustre, a slight irregularity in the beads. "Very pretty," she said, "but I wonder if Lady Beatrice would agree." She handed it back, her eyes meeting Grayson's, who looked away. Stokes ordered the necklace secured, and Grayson detained for questioning, his voice firm but tinged with reluctance, as if he disliked the turn of events. As Grayson was led away, Miss Marple caught sight of Reed, lingering at the corridor's end, his face ashen. He met her gaze, then turned and fled, his steps quick and unsteady. She added to her notebook, "Grayson, caught with necklace, likely fake. Reed, saw, ran." The trap had sprung, but Reed's reaction suggested he held a piece of the puzzle, perhaps as a witness to Grayson's actions. She thought of a saint. Mary Mead burglary, where a nervous stable boy had seen the thief but stayed silent, fearing blame. Reed, she suspected, was in a similar bind. Returning to her cabin, Miss Marple sat by the porthole, her mind weaving the night's events into the larger pattern. Grayson's attempt to return a necklace, so soon after the reward's announcement, was the slip she had anticipated, but the necklace's authenticity remained to be tested. The Aurora, with its glittering facade and hidden secrets, was yielding its truths, and Miss Marple knew the final unravelling was near. She closed her notebook, her eyes on the starlit sea, ready to tie the last threads of the mystery together. Chapter 12. The Truth Unravelled. The SS. Aurora sailed into the dawn, its white hull cutting through a Mediterranean sea now tinged with the gold of morning. The Grand Saloon, where the gala had sparkled only nights before, was filled with passengers, their faces a mix of anticipation and unease. The theft of Lady Beatrice Harrow's pearl necklace had held the ship in a grip of suspicion, but now, with Mr. Leonard Grayson detained and a necklace recovered, the air hummed with the promise of resolution. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the front, her shawl neatly draped and her hands folded in her lap, appeared as unassuming as ever. Yet her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, gleamed with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle nearly solved. Captain Stokes stood at the centre of the saloon, his gold-braided uniform crisp, but his face etched with strain. Beside him stood Lady Beatrice, her sapphire gown a muted echo of her lost pearls, her expression one of cautious hope. The passengers, summoned for an announcement, whispered among themselves, their eyes darting to Grayson, who sat under guard near the captain, his usual polish dimmed by a pallor of defeat. Miss Marple, who had orchestrated the trap that caught him, watched closely, her mind weaving the final threads of the mystery. Stokes raised a hand for silence, his voice resonant but grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to diligent efforts and the insight of Miss Marple, we have recovered a necklace believed to be Lady Beatrice's. Mr. Grayson was found attempting to return it last night, claiming it was misplaced in his luggage. We are now determining its authenticity and his role in the theft." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Grayson's head bowed slightly, his fingers clenched. Miss Marple, at Stokes's nod, rose, her slight figure commanding attention through its very modesty. "If I may, Captain," she said, her voice as gentle as a village breeze, "I believe I can clarify matters." The passengers leaned forward, their curiosity piqued by this unassuming spinster who had outwitted a thief. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, lingering briefly on Mr. Harold Vance, pale and silent, Miss Clara Dunn twisting her bracelet, and Thomas Reed, the steward, standing rigid at the back, his face a mask of dread. "It began with the pearl," she said, her tone conversational, as if recounting a parish tale. "The one found near Mr. Vance's cabin was meant to point suspicion at him, but it was a fake, its lustre too dull for Lady Beatrice's fine set. Only someone with skill could craft such a thing, and Mr. Grayson, a jeweller in financial straits, had both the knowledge and the motive." She paused, noting Grayson's tightened jaw. His appraisal of the necklace, done privately in Lady Beatrice's cabin, gave him time to study it closely, perhaps too closely. She turned to the captain. The cabin's lock was intact, but the porthole was open, a small detail easily overlooked. A close. A jeweller's tools are precise, and Mr. Grayson could have used them to slip through that porthole during the gala, when the ship was alive with distraction. He took the necklace and later crafted a replica, planning to return it for the reward. The saloon buzzed, and Grayson's voice broke through, sharp but strained. "This is nonsense! I found the necklace, that's all." Miss Marple smiled faintly, undeterred. "The necklace you returned, Mr. Grayson, was examined this morning by the ship's jeweller. It's a forgery, well made, but not the real pearls. Your mistake was the single pearl, dropped to frame Mr. Vance. Its imperfection betrayed you." She turned to Reed, who flinched under her gaze. "Mr. Reed saw you near the cabins that night, didn't he? His fear kept him silent, but his flight last night confirmed it." Reed's face crumpled, and he nodded, his voice a whisper. "I saw him by the porthole, but I was afraid to speak. The captain, he'd blame me for neglecting my duties." Stokes's expression darkened, but he remained silent. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "Mr. Vance's debts made him a convenient target, and the captain's haste to search cabins may have been to protect his crew, or to settle a personal matter with Lady Beatrice, a disagreement over the ship's route." Stokes stiffened, but Miss Marple's eyes were kind. "No matter, Captain. The truth is out." She gestured to the necklace in Stokes's hand. "The real pearls, I believe, are still in Mr. Grayson's possession, likely in that locked case he carries." An officer retrieved the case from Grayson's cabin, and under Stokes's command, it was opened, revealing the true necklace, its lustre unmistakable. The saloon erupted in applause, and Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears as she reclaimed her treasure. Grayson was led away, his protests drowned by the crowd's relief. Miss Marple returned to her seat, her notebook closed. The Aurora sailed on, its passengers lighter, the mystery unravelled by a quiet spinster whose sharp mind had cut through deception. As the sea sparkled under the rising sun, Miss Marple smiled, her thoughts already drifting to the next puzzle life might bring.